everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Blake's Books. Today I have another book review for you, and that is for Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Mistborn series, both the overall series as well as the first Mistborn trilogy, otherwise known as Mistborn Era 1. And one of the first novels published by Brandon Sanderson and one of the first Cosmere novels. And this was a reread for me. This was one of the several rereads that I really wanted to get to this year. I've been trying to do at least one per month, and this is one that I really wanted to make a priority, really wanted to get this trilogy reread this year. And so I'm going to be doing that over the course of the summer. And I read this book first a couple years ago, like probably 2 years and a couple months or so ago. And I really enjoyed it the first time around. It was my first Sanderson book. It was one of my first like adult fantasy books. It was kind of like Lord of the Rings was my first real adult fantasy book. Then I got into a little bit of like Game of Thrones and The Witcher. And after those, this was kind of the really big point for me in terms of fantasy books was reading Mistborn, because I really loved Lord of the Rings and I loved some of that other stuff. You know, I really loved the first couple of A Song of Ice and Fire books and things like that, but Mistborn was the book that really like stuck with me a huge amount, and like kind of was just like a new favorite type deal. And so I was very excited to reread it now, a couple years later, now that I have mostly caught up on the Cosmere, which is crazy and has been an incredible journey, and see what I think of this trilogy now with the knowledge of the Cosmere in general, having read all these other books and things like that, and experienced all these different stories and different worlds, and see what I think of this starting point that I began with. And I expected to enjoy it, obviously, but I think I've gained an even further love and appreciation for this book on a reread, because first of all, of the not the hindsight, but like the you know, the knowledge of the way things are gonna go and seeing how well like set up everything was and everything, but also because as time has gone on, the original Mistborn trilogy has kind of fallen a little bit in my kind of rankings of the Cosmere, and in terms of like books that I've read in general. Like it's still like up there, but it's not like top tier favorite anymore, or at least it wasn't. And having read it again, I was just blown away all over again by it, and really just had a great time with it. I don't know that I would say it's like my favorite Cosmere book or anything like that, but it is definitely much closer to being that way than it used to be. And I just had a great time with it. So to get actually started talking about the book, there's a lot of things I want to talk about, because there's a lot of things I really like about this book. First things first, I love just the premise of this book, which Brandon pitches this as basically being like the world building pitch is basically, what if the Dark Lord won? Like, what if the prophesied hero failed and the Dark Lord won? And then you fast forward some time and then you have Mistborn. And I really like that idea. I love the idea of like this book itself, which is basically like a fantasy heist, which is really cool, kind of mixed with learning, like a character like learning how to become a magic user and different things like that, on top of a fantasy heist, on top of also trying to bring down this giant empire, which is just a really fun combination and a fun premise. I also like the plot in general of this book is really interesting. There's a lot of really interesting things that happen in this book. I already, obviously, since I had read this book already, I knew the general like plot beats of this book. I'd forgotten some of the specifics, of course, so reading those again was a delight. But you know, I knew the specifics of or the general like the way the plot would go. But even knowing all of that, it was still super exciting to read. I was always excited to see the next thing that was going to happen, even though, again, I kind of knew the way things were going to go. It was just fun to read and always very engaging and exciting to me. And there's just a lot of really cool stuff going on here. Like I mentioned, you have these kind of different parts of the plot. So you have Vin, the main character of this book, who's an excellent character. And you have her kind of street urchin, kind of like really just her life's not going so great, and she gets taken in by Kelsier, who wants to lead this crew in basically robbing the Final Empire, which is the empire being led by the Lord Ruler, who is the Dark Lord that one, basically. And so you have this side of the story that is Vin learning to further accept herself, accept other people, and things like that. You have her training with Kelsier because they discover that she has the ability to become Mistborn, which is kind of the magic user in this world. You have, the crew trying to figure out how to, do the heist, as well as then later on figuring out how to bring down the final empire. And you have Vin getting into the class politics and things like that, which is really interesting. There's just a lot of really interesting aspects to this plot that I think are done very well in the way that it feels cohesive. There's a lot of different things going on, but it feels like it all connects very nicely, all works together very well, feels like it all works. And you can tell Brandon is very much he plans things out with his books, which is something that I really admire about him. And when I eventually, hopefully, start writing my own stuff, which I'm in the extremely early stages of right now, more so in terms of the planning and ideas phase than actually writing, but that is something that I want to emulate because I think that is a very effective way to write stories because it lets everything really come together very nicely. So I really appreciate that about it. I love the characters in this book as well. I found the crew a bit more interesting this time around. The first time around, I loved Vin, I loved Kelsier, I loved one or two of the other characters, but the crew themselves, Ham and Breeze and Sazed, even though Sazed became my favorite character in the trilogy, all those characters were good, but they weren't super memorable to me, whereas I think this time around they were much more so. I think part of that was probably just due to the nature of a reread. You kind of, especially now that I've read a lot more books, I kind of could pay attention to things a little differently, I guess. And kind of focus on other things that I didn't quite catch the first time. But I really enjoyed all of the characters in this book. The crew is all a lot of fun. They all have unique personalities to them that are fun to watch, their dynamics they have with each other. Vin's a great protagonist, very interesting protagonist who just has a really kind of inspiring story about her, especially as you get into the entire trilogy. And Kelsier was the standout character for me in this book, much like he was the first time I read this book. Kelsier has always kind of been the standout in the first Mistborn book to me. I think he's a really interesting character, and especially with the context of not only the entire trilogy, but also things like Mistborn's secret history and different things like that. He just becomes a much more interesting character to me, having read this again, and even more so than he already was. So great stuff with the characters, great action and world building, which kind of go together because the world building, the magic is very action focused, which the magic in Mistborn I really enjoy. It's probably one of Brandon's most recognizable magic systems, and I think I can see why. Granted, there's 3 magic systems in Mistborn, but the Allomancy magic system is very recognizable and a lot of fun to read. It's complex in the sense that there's a lot of different moving pieces. The different metals do different things. When you ingest them, they give you different abilities, which for a first-time reader like I was when I first read this was a little bit complex to get a hold of, but I think it's very fun to read, and I enjoy just seeing the magic in action. And it's a very visual magic system. I can envision it in my head. I would imagine, hopefully, when Mistborn gets an adaptation, I would imagine seeing the magic in action is going to be a lot of fun. So really interesting magic. I love the world building in general as well. In the visual aspect, in the way that it's described visually, the way the world is described. Also, the kind of class system was very interesting to me this time around, which is something I didn't quite notice as much the first time around, but seeing the Ska, who are kind of the low class, slave class type thing, and then you have the noblemen, and you have the Lord Ruler and all his people, the Obligators and the Steel Inquisitors and different things like that. The different groups of people and the way that they relate to one another was very interesting to me this time around. I enjoyed that stuff the first time as well, but I think I was able to focus in on that a lot more this time around because the first time I was just wrapped up in the everything of this book. And all that stuff. So this time I was able to kind of really pay more attention to that, and I thought it was really interesting. And I really enjoyed some of the kind of theming around the class systems and things like that that were going on in this book. It was really cool stuff. What else to talk about with this book? I love the ending of this book as well, which I'm not going to spoil. I'm not going to do like a spoiler section of this video as much as I might like to, because I don't think I have a huge amount to talk about in regards to spoilers, but I do really like the ending of this book. I like the way that everything feels so well foreshadowed, which again makes this a very rewarding reread, and not only foreshadowed for this book, but for the entire trilogy, which is amazing. But it like just the way everything comes together in the end was really interesting, and the way that the ending is satisfying by itself is something that I really appreciate, because Mistborn is probably the book that I most point to if you were to ask me where should you start the Cosmere. Granted, I think you can start with just about anything. I have a whole video about this subject if you're curious. But I think Mistborn is one of the best places to start because it functions both as a standalone, even though it's not a standalone. You can read this by itself, and if you feel like you've got enough, you can stop there, because it is a very well, it's not self-contained fully, but like it has an arc that is completed by the end of the book and is satisfying in itself. But then there's also these hints of things to come that are set up even like early in the book. Things that are hinted at that are going to be followed through later in the trilogy, which I really appreciate. So it's just the way that everything in terms of foreshadowing was handled, the way the ending was handled in terms of like the events that was happening was very exciting, very interesting, different things like that. And just the way the book ends in terms of having that ability of, you know, if you want to stop here, you can, but you can also keep going, which is something that I do appreciate about this book quite a bit, especially for new readers of the Cosmere. I could probably continue talking about this book if I wanted to, but this review is getting a little long, so I'm going to stop now. I don't really have any big negative points to talk about with this book. I just had a great time with it. I do think that I enjoyed it more so this time around, for sure. Not that I didn't love it the first time around, but this time I really got into it, and just had a wonderful time with it, and was a very rewarding reread. So I would imagine in the future, if I ever decide to do a full Cosmere reread, or even just reread certain series or books, I would imagine I'll probably have a very similar experience of just really liking the way that everything comes together, because it's super cool. And that's something that Brandon's very well known for, so it makes sense. So as far as a rating out of 10 that I would give Mistborn: The Final Empire, I'd give it a 10 out of 10 pretty easily. I just had a great time with it. I know I praise the crap out of Sanderson on this channel, but I just love his stuff, and I love this book. So I'm very much looking forward to reading The Well of Ascension very soon, and after that reading The Hero of Ages. I'm just really excited about getting to read this trilogy again, and I think that it's going to be a lot of fun if this book is anything to go by. So that's pretty much it for this review. Let me know in the comments if you have read The Final Empire and what you thought of it, if this is your favorite in the trilogy, least favorite in the trilogy, whatever you may think of it. If you have read it multiple times, if it was also kind of similar for you, very rewarding to reread and things like that. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and be on the lookout for reviews for The Well of Ascension and The Hero of Ages in the coming month or two. So that's pretty much it for this video, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.